My name's Elizabeth Hartley, and 5 years ago I made a quiet promise to myself. If I held the family together financially, they'd respect me for it. I was wrong. At a backyard barbecue in Vermont, my own mother gave away the house I'd secretly been paying for to my sister. That's when I realized they were never planning to tell me, and they were never planning to say thank you. What would you do if your silence was used against you? Before we get into this story, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below, and if you've ever been betrayed by family in a way that still stings, this one might hit close to home. It started with the ribs. I just pulled them from the grill, sticky, caramelized, and falling off the bone. The kind Dad always swore I made better than anyone else. My hands were still sticky with barbecue sauce when Mom called everyone to gather near the picnic table. She held a champagne flute in one hand, already half empty, her smile just a little too wide. "Let's raise a glass," she said, "to Sarah and Brandon." My younger sister Sarah beamed beside her fiancé, Brandon, who was already eyeing the next platter of deviled eggs like he owned the place. They were glowing, matching linen shirts, sun-drenched cheeks. Perfect in that curated way only Instagram couples manage to be in real life. Mom continued, "We're so thrilled for their upcoming wedding and—" She paused, looking around at all the smiling faces, including mine. "We decided to give them the house as our wedding gift." My smile froze. Someone, probably my cousin Jason, cheered. There were gasps and whoops, and someone shouted, "That's amazing," like we were on a game show. But I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. "What house?" I asked, even though I already knew. Mom's eyes flitted toward me briefly. "The one on Pine Ridge, of course. Your father and I agreed it would be perfect for them." And then Dad, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, added with a chuckle, "You've already got your beach place, Lizzie. You're doing great." That's when my grip tightened around the fork I'd been holding. Not enough to break it, but enough to feel the tines bend ever so slightly. They said it like it was nothing, like it was fair. Like my 5 years of quiet deposits, auto-drafted every month from the account no one asked about, were just background noise, because they didn't know, or maybe, just maybe, they did. Brandon slung an arm around Sarah's shoulder, kissed her cheek. "We can't believe it either," he said, grinning at me like this was all part of a fun surprise. "Totally out of the blue. Your mom's got great taste. That porch swing, killer." That porch swing, the one I paid for last Christmas. "I didn't know they were giving it away," I said, finally finding my voice. It came out too soft, too calm, but inside I was screaming. Sarah looked at me, her smile twitching. "You've got your own house, Liz," she said, like we'd rehearsed this. "And you don't even like pine trees." "I like honesty," I replied, locking eyes with her. "Do you?" She flinched, but said nothing. The conversation shifted quickly, like these things do. Someone brought out more drinks, and Uncle Dan made a joke about property taxes. But I stood there, ribs untouched on my plate, the weight of betrayal heavy in my chest. I had paid every mortgage bill for that house for 5 years. Quietly. Consistently. Because Mom had asked me to. "We're going through a rough patch just until Dad's settlement comes through," she'd said back then. "You're the only one who could really help." I hadn't told a soul, not even my ex-husband. I thought if I just did the right thing, the family would stay whole. But now I was standing in the middle of a Vermont backyard, staring at the people I thought I knew and realizing I was never part of the plan. I was the safety net, the backup plan, the bank. And they'd given my house away with a champagne toast. That night, the dishes clattered like glass grenades in my sink. I wasn't even hungry. The ribs sat untouched in the fridge, mocking me with their perfect caramelized glaze. I scrubbed the same plate 3 times, not because it was dirty, but because my hands didn't know where else to go. When my phone rang, I didn't need to look. I already knew. Mom. Her contact photo, an old picture from the Outer Banks, her smiling under a floppy sun hat, popped up like a ghost of a version I used to trust. I let it ring twice before answering. "Lizzie," she began, her voice already coated in a sugary tone I recognized too well. "Sweetheart, I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all," I said, drying my hands calmly. "Just standing in the kitchen of the house I paid for." There was a pause, just long enough to register, but she steamrolled past it. "Well, I wanted to check in. I know yesterday's announcement was unexpected." "You could say that." I didn't mean for it to come out like that, she said, almost convincing. I just thought in the moment with the family there, it felt like the right time. To announce that you gave away a house I've been quietly funding for half a decade, I asked. My voice wasn't angry, it was colder than that. Distant, surgical. Well, technically, she said, drawing out the word like it was a life raft. Your name isn't on the deed. You offered to help with the mortgage, which was incredibly generous, sweetheart. She was walking the tightrope now, balancing the guilt with the gaslight. I didn't offer, I corrected. You asked. You said you and Dad were underwater and I stepped in because I love you. I didn't do it for Sarah. I didn't do it so she could redecorate the sunroom I paid to renovate. Another pause. She tried a softer tactic. You've always been so capable, Lizzie, so stable, I knew you'd understand. And there it was, the unspoken deal. I was the responsible one, the self-made daughter, the one they didn't have to worry about, which apparently also meant I was the one they could use. She cleared her throat delicately. Actually, there's something else I wanted to ask you about. I waited. I already knew this wasn't an apology. It was a setup. Your father and I were talking, and we think it might be nice to take a little break from the Vermont place. Downsize temporarily. It's gotten so high maintenance. All those stairs and gutters and, well, you know how your father's back is. I could feel it coming like a slow-motion car crash. We were wondering, she continued lightly, if we might spend a few weeks, just a little while at your beach house. You know, decompress. I leaned back against the counter, the absurdity hitting me square in the chest. They had just gifted the house I paid for to my sister like it was a prize in a raffle. And now they wanted to decompress in the only home I owned outright. I could have yelled. I could have told her everything I'd been holding back, but I didn't. I took a slow breath and smiled. You just handed Sarah and Brandon a house I funded, I said calmly. If you're looking for a vacation, I suggest Airbnb. She let out a soft, awkward laugh, unsure if I was joking. I mean it, I added. This house isn't available. Not to you, not to Dad, not even for a weekend. Lizzie, she said, her voice tightening. There's no need to be clear, I interrupted. I think there is. The silence on the line stretched, brittle and sharp. Well, she said eventually, her tone turning clipped, I see where you're at. I'm exactly where I should be, I replied. We said our good nights after that, polite, rehearsed, and razor-thin. She even ended with her usual love you, sweetie, but it landed like a rock in an empty well. I didn't say it back. As I hung up, I stared out the window at the moonlight painting silver across the ocean. This house was mine. Every inch of it had been bought with sacrifice, long nights, missed vacations, bonus checks quietly diverted to my parents' emergencies. And yet, until tonight, I had never drawn a single boundary. But now, that changed. They may have stolen the house I paid for, but they weren't going to live in me anymore. It started with a buzz. I was sitting on the porch of my beach house, coffee cooling beside me, morning sun glinting off the water like nothing had changed. Like the world was still sane. Then came the vibration. I reached for my phone without thinking, reflex, habit, whatever, and saw the notification. Sarah Watson tagged you in a post. I blinked. Sarah rarely posted anything public. When she did, it was polished, vacation reels, latte art, carefully posed ring selfies with captions like brunchin' with bae. But this was different. There were screenshots of text messages, fake ones. One had my name at the top, Elizabeth in bold, and the alleged message said, You know I only helped with the mortgage so I could keep control over Mom and Dad. Another said, If they love you more, they can pay for you. I'm done funding your pity party. And below them, the caption in Sarah's signature font read, Sometimes family isn't about blood, it's about manipulation. Thank you to everyone who stood by us during this awful time. We're trying to stay positive. Dozens of comments followed. Heart emojis, crying faces, people I hadn't spoken to in years chiming in. Wow, Liz always seemed intense. Sending you love, girl, you don't deserve toxic energy. You're better off without the drama. My throat went dry. I reread the messages. Again and again. The words weren't mine. The tone wasn't mine, but somehow they looked real. I called her. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up, her voice sickly sweet. Hey, wasn't expecting to hear from you. You know those aren't real, I said. My voice trembled, but I forced it steady. A pause. Then, it's about how it feels, Liz. My stomach dropped. "Excuse me. You've always had this way of making everything about control," she said, tone casual like we were chatting over coffee, not dissecting a live broadcast to hundreds of people. "Mom and Dad felt suffocated by you. They just didn't want to say it." "Are you hearing yourself?" I asked quietly. "Oh, come on," she scoffed. "You're always acting like you're the martyr, like the family accountant and emotional gatekeeper all rolled into one. It's exhausting. I paid for the house you're living in." Silence. Then a sharp laugh. "You didn't live there. What did you care what happened to it?" "I cared because it was never yours to give away," I said, voice cracking. "And now you're painting me as some villain on the internet. People are going to believe what they want," she said breezily. "You've always been the cold one, Liz. Now everyone sees it." And just like that, she hung up. I sat there for a long time, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead line. The waves crashed softly in the distance. Seagulls shrieked somewhere above, but inside something broke. It wasn't just the betrayal of the fake messages. It was how easily she had done it. How quickly she twisted a lifetime of quiet sacrifice into a self-serving smear campaign. And the worst part, she didn't even sound angry. She sounded entertained. I opened Facebook again. The post had over 200 likes. Some were mutual friends, family members, even an old coworker who had once asked me to be her maid of honor. I didn't comment. I didn't post my own rebuttal. I didn't beg anyone to believe me. I just sat, because I knew something Sarah didn't. This wasn't the end of my silence. It was the beginning of my preparation. But right then, on the porch of the house I bought with my own money, alone again, I just let myself feel it. The ache, the disbelief, the beginning of something I didn't have a name for yet, but would soon. It was Michael's name that flashed across my screen next. I stared at it, confused. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since our divorce was finalized. Ours hadn't been a dramatic ending, more like a quiet unraveling. Too many late nights at work, too many unsaid things. Eventually, we folded, gently but completely. So when his text came through, I had to reread it twice. "Michael, hey, you should know they tried selling the house to me last spring. Said it was a good deal if I didn't tell you. I didn't bite. Wanna meet?" My chest tightened. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I set the phone down, poured myself a glass of water, and tried to make sense of the wave of nausea creeping up my spine. I thought I had found the bottom of this betrayal, but apparently the hole was deeper than I imagined. We met 2 days later at the coastal cafe we used to visit when we still wore wedding bands. It hadn't changed. Same chipped turquoise chairs, same lemon poppy seed muffins under glass domes by the register. The familiarity was jarring. Michael was already seated at a corner table when I arrived. He stood as I approached, still that same reflexive politeness, and offered a small, hesitant smile. "You look good," he said, nodding to the empty seat I sat. "So do you." There was a pause as we both reached for our cups at the same time. His coffee, my tea. The silence hung between us like a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. "I wouldn't have reached out," he began, fingers curling around the mug, "but it didn't sit right with me." "What didn't?" He pulled out his phone, tapped through a few screens, then slid it across the table. On the screen was an email from my father. Subject line, "Potential sale of Pine Ridge home, discreet inquiry." Body, "We're considering selling the property to raise some liquidity for Sarah and Brandon's honeymoon. You'd be a perfect buyer, clean, off-market transaction, and of course, we trust you to keep this quiet from Elizabeth." The timestamp read, March of last year. My breath caught in my throat. "They wanted to sell it," I whispered. Michael nodded. "I didn't respond at first, thought maybe they'd sent it by mistake, but then 2 weeks later your mom followed up, said it'd be a nice way for you to finally move on." "Move on from what?" I asked bitterly. "My own house." I didn't reply after that. It felt dirty, like a trap. I swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell me then?" He looked at me with quiet guilt. "Honestly, we weren't in touch. And I thought maybe it wasn't my business anymore. And now it is. Now it feels like something you deserve to know." I stared down at the phone, rereading the message until the words blurred. My parents hadn't just stolen the home, they had tried to profit from it, sell it under my nose. To Michael, of all people. Maybe because they thought he'd still want to stay on my good side, or maybe because they thought I wouldn't fight back. "They really believed I'd never find out," I murmured, more to myself than him. Michael gave a short nod. That's what your mom said in the second email. I've still got that one too. You want it? I looked up, my voice low. Please. He sipped his coffee and leaned back. I don't know what they're trying to pull, Liz, but it's more than just favoritism. It feels intentional, like they're trying to erase what you did for them. I met his eyes. You think I'm overreacting? No, he said immediately. I think you've been too quiet for too long. We sat there for a while, not saying much. The waves crashed just outside the patio, and I could hear laughter from a group of tourists at the next table. It all felt far away. I used to think being the responsible one would earn me something, I said softly. Respect, loyalty, a place at the table. Michael didn't interrupt. But all it got me was a bill, a silence clause, and now public slander. He exhaled. You deserve better from all of them. I nodded slowly. Before we parted, he handed me a USB stick with both emails saved on it. No fanfare, no emotional closure, just an old kindness repurposed for the wreckage of my family. As I walked back to my car, I glanced at the cafe one last time. So many memories were tied up in that place, some warm, some fraying at the edges. Today, it gave me something new, truth. And truth, I was starting to learn, was the beginning of power. It was the yellow tape that caught my eye first. I'd only stepped out for the afternoon, just a quick run to the market and a coffee downtown. But when I pulled back into the driveway of my beach house, something felt off. The kind of off that sinks into your bones before your brain catches up. There, stretched across my front steps, was a piece of thin, curling police tape, flapping lazily in the sea breeze. I stared at it, unblinking. And taped to my front door, fluttering beneath a magnet shaped like a seahorse, was a folded piece of notebook paper. Elizabeth, your parents were here. Said they were moving in. I called the non-emergency line, thought you should know. Doug next door, Doug, the retired mechanic with a weathered face and a Labrador named Chester. He'd never once meddled in my life. So for him to write a note like this, my hand shook as I pulled it down. The lock turned easily, no forced entry. But when I stepped inside, I knew they'd been here. The air was wrong, not violated in the shattered glass kind of way. No, this was subtler, more insidious. Things had shifted. The framed photograph on the hallway table, me and Maya on the coast of Maine, was gone. In its place, an old picture of Sarah and me as kids in matching pink life jackets. I hadn't seen that photo in 20 years. The throw pillows on the couch had been rearranged. A pale blue guest towel, one of the cheap ones I never used, was neatly folded and hanging on the bathroom rack. The coffee mug in the sink wasn't mine. And worst of all, the scent. My mother's perfume. That soft, dated floral she wore to brunches and funerals. It hung in the air like a whisper that wouldn't leave. I moved slowly through the house, checking each room, each drawer. Nothing missing, nothing broken, but everything wrong. It wasn't burglary, it was staking claim. I ended up in the kitchen, gripping the counter like it might float if the floor gave way. My phone was buzzing Maya again. I let it ring. My parents had walked into my sanctuary, my one untouched space, and left their fingerprints like a calling card. Moving in, the note had said. Not asking, not calling, just moving in. They had assumed I'd roll over, that I'd walk in, see the towel, the photo, the ghost of a presence, and smile politely. That I'd say, of course, take the guest room. Stay as long as you like. Instead, I whispered the only thing I could manage in that moment. They really thought I'd roll over. I don't remember sitting down, but I found myself at the kitchen table with my laptop open, fingers trembling over the keyboard. I pulled up the security footage. Thank God I'd had the forethought to install cameras after the last conversation with Sarah. There they were. My mother and father at 9:42 a.m., unlocking the door with the spare key I'd stupidly left hidden under the pot on the porch, carrying boxes, boxes. She walked in like she owned the place. Dad followed behind, head low, setting a duffel on the couch. Mom wandered through the kitchen, pausing to admire the sunflowers I'd bought 2 days ago. I watched as she smiled. A serene, smug little smile, like she had just stepped into something long overdue. They stayed for nearly an hour, unpacking, shifting things, rearranging the books on my shelf. At one point, she picked up a framed certificate, my business award from last year, and turned it around so the glass faced the wall. As if my success didn't match her decor. I closed the laptop slowly, my jaw set tight. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't confusion. It was an invasion. They wanted to rewrite the story again, to pretend I was the overachieving sister with too much space and too little empathy. That they, the humble parents without a home, had no choice but to seek shelter in their daughter's beach house. But this wasn't generosity. This was war. I stood in the center of my kitchen and made myself a vow. They would not twist this into another story about me being the problem. Not this time, not after everything. I was done playing the quiet one, and they were about to learn what it felt like when I stopped being quiet. The call came the next morning. "Miss Hartley." The voice on the line was crisp, official. "This is Officer Braden from the local precinct. Your parents have reported being locked out of what they claim is their legal residence, your property on Ocean View Drive." I blinked at the ceiling, barely awake. The mug of tea on my nightstand had long gone cold. "I see," I said flatly. "And did they mention why they believe that?" He cleared his throat. "They said it's a family dispute, that they'd been given permission to move in and that you changed the locks without warning." Permission. The word hit like a slap. I sat up, voice level. "Officer Braden, I'll be at the house in 20 minutes. You can meet me there, and I'll bring the deed." "Understood." He hung up. I didn't. I stayed seated, staring at the sunlight crawling across my bedroom wall. Then, slowly, I stood and got dressed, dark jeans, a fitted sweater, and the leather flats I always wore when I needed to be taken seriously. 15 minutes later, I was standing in my driveway. They were already there, my parents. My father, standing stiffly by their car, arms crossed like he was on trial for something he didn't do. My mother, in one of her polished casual cardigans, face painted in sorrow. I'd seen that look before, at PTA meetings, at funerals, at brunches where she needed the server to feel sorry for her poor, difficult life. Beside them stood Officer Braden, a stocky man with a clean-shaven face and a clipboard tucked under one arm. I walked up slowly, paperwork folder in hand. "Miss Hartley," he nodded, professional, "thank you for coming." "I always show up for my property," I said, tone cool. My mother stepped forward. "Elizabeth, honey, this is all a big misunderstanding. We didn't want to make it a legal issue, but—" "You already did," I said calmly. I turned to the officer, flipping open the folder. "This is the deed to the house. The mortgage is in my name, the insurance, the utilities, everything. There is no lease, no verbal agreement, and certainly no residency claim from these two." He took the documents and reviewed them, nodding slowly. "It's all here, I just needed to confirm. And if you check the security footage," I added, "you'll see they entered the property without permission. I've already downloaded it to a drive, happy to submit it if needed." My father muttered something under his breath. My mother's mouth opened, ready to launch into some rehearsed tale, no doubt. But the officer turned to them instead. "Ma'am, sir, you cannot return to this property uninvited. Doing so again may constitute trespassing." My mother gasped. "But she's our daughter." "That may be," he said firmly, "but she's also the legal owner, and she's made her position very clear." There was a silence, a long, strained silence. My father looked away. My mother's expression curdled. She wasn't used to people choosing rules over her version of events. I looked at them both, heart hammering beneath my calm exterior. It would have been so easy to erupt, to list every sacrifice, every check I wrote, every lie I let slide for the sake of family peace. But I didn't. Instead, I let the silence work. Let them sit in it. Let them feel the weight of not being in control. After a moment, Officer Braden handed back the documents. "Everything checks out. They'll need to leave the premises now. If there's any further contact, let us know." Looked between us. "I hope this can be resolved peacefully." My mother's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, another performance just for show. "Have a good day," I told the officer, shaking his hand. He turned to escort them back to their car. My mother gave me one final look as she opened the passenger door. "I never thought you'd turn your back on your own parents," she said softly. I tilted my head. "I never thought my parents would lie to the police." Her lips parted, then closed. She got in the car. They drove away. I stood on the porch, holding the folder to my chest like armor. Not triumphant, not angry, just settled. Because for the first time in this war, someone outside the family had said it out loud. I was right. And they were uninvited. The envelope arrived with Tuesday's mail. It was sandwiched between a utility bill and a catalog I didn't remember subscribing to. I nearly tossed it on the counter without looking until I saw the return address. Watson and Lane, LLP. My blood stilled. I slid it open with the same letter opener I used to open birthday cards and insurance renewals. But this wasn't a card. This wasn't even a warning. It was a lawsuit, filed on behalf of Brandon J. Watson, citing severe emotional distress due to unexpected and unstable housing arrangements caused by Elizabeth Hartley's actions. A $10,000 claim, plus court fees, plus a list of supposed incidents that included the phrase, hostile behavior unfit for familial environments. I sat down, slowly, carefully. It was printed on expensive paper. They were serious. A low, bitter laugh slipped out before I could stop it. Brandon, who once left an oil stain on my linen couch and laughed it off, was now suing me for emotional instability. No mention of the free rent. No mention of the utilities I paid when Sarah forgot. No mention of the house I'd bought and funded, or the one they stole behind my back. I stared at the closing line of the letter. We hope this matter can be resolved amicably before it escalates to trial. Trial. My hands were steady as I placed the letter face down on the counter. Then I picked it up again and walked into my office. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened my laptop and scheduled an appointment with my attorney. By noon the next day, I was sitting across from Grace Lynn, my lawyer since my divorce. A calm, sharp woman with tortoiseshell glasses and a terrifying gift for making grown men stutter in deposition rooms. She skimmed the letter, then set it aside. "Do they seriously think this will stick?" I asked. She leaned back. "It won't, but they're not trying to win, they're trying to scare you." "It's working," I admitted, then paused. "But not the way they think." Grace gave me a knowing smile. "You're ready to fight." "I'm ready to dig." I leaned forward. "If they want to make this legal, fine, but I'm not just defending anymore. I want proof, receipts, records. I want to trace every dollar I ever sent toward that house." "Then we hire a forensic accountant," she said, already pulling out a notepad. "We subpoena their financials, mortgage statements, bank transfers, anything connected to the Pine Ridge property. And Sarah," I added. "I want to know how much they funneled to her under my nose." Grace nodded. "If they've mishandled funds, we'll find it." There was something terrifyingly empowering about those words. They wanted to break me down. Instead, they'd just given me permission to build a case. I stood to leave, but paused at the door. "Grace," I said quietly. She looked up. "Yeah, I don't want to win just to win." "Then why?" I swallowed. "Because I want the truth, all of it, and I want them to choke on it." Her expression sharpened. "Then we go nuclear," she said. I walked out of her office into the late afternoon light, clutching my folder like a weapon. They thought they could steal from me. They thought they could shame me, humiliate me, paint me as unstable. But they'd forgotten something important. I kept records. I didn't expect the spreadsheets to hurt. They were just numbers, cells and columns and color-coded tabs. Nothing dramatic, no damning letter, no signed confession, just a trail of digits. But betrayal, when distilled into decimal points and payment dates, somehow cuts cleaner than any lie ever could. Across the table, Nolan, the forensic accountant Grace had recommended, clicked through another tab. He was young, polite, painfully thorough. "This is what I wanted you to see," he said, tapping the screen with a capped pen. "It's subtle, but the pattern's consistent." I leaned in. The spreadsheet was titled, Property Account Transfers, Pine Ridge Holdings, 2017-2023. "I've highlighted all the mortgage payments in green. That's your money. Routed through your business account, then transferred to an intermediary family account listed under your mother's name." I nodded. I remembered authorizing those payments. Monthly. For years. Always believing they were temporary, just until things stabilized. Just until Dad's disability case came through. Just until. "And this," he said, switching tabs, "is the trust." It had a different name, something generic, Willow Rock Educational Reserve. "Created in 2020, Nolan continued. Funded quarterly. The deposits come from the same intermediary account. It's earmarked exclusively for a beneficiary listed as Sarah Watson." I stared at it. $10,000 here, $7,500 there. A lump sum last winter, $25,000. He scrolled further. The funds were transferred right after major payments from your accounts. Not every time, but enough to establish intent. So, I said slowly, not only did they use my money to cover the mortgage, they funneled the excess into a trust for your sister, he finished. Yes, I sat back, breath shallow. They used my money, I whispered, to build her a financial cushion. Nolan gave a small nod. Legally, it's murky. The accounts weren't in your name, but paper trails matter. This wasn't an accident, it was structured. Hidden. Hidden, the word landed like a brick. All those years I skipped vacations, said no to upgrades, passed on bonuses being used to build someone else's future. Someone who never asked, never thanked, never cared to wonder where the money came from. I stared at the spreadsheet. It didn't scream, it didn't accuse, but it told the truth in the quietest, cruelest way possible. I looked at Nolan. Can you print this for the case? He nodded. Already compiling the report. Grace will have it by morning. I stood slowly, my hands flat on the polished table. One more question, I said. Of course. That trust, it's still active. Yes, balance is around $82,000. I blinked. $82,000. He nodded again. And every dollar of it can be traced back to you. I didn't speak for a long moment. Then finally I inhaled. Then it's my turn. Nolan looked up. I gave a tight, careful smile, not triumphant. Not theatrical, just ready. They wanted to play games, I said, but they forgot I know how to keep score. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, just in spirit. All concrete, beige walls and quiet footsteps. The kind of place where truth felt like it had to whisper just to be heard. I sat at the long oak table beside Grace, hands clasped neatly, shoulders squared. She looked sharp as ever in navy, flipping through our documents with quiet efficiency. Across the room sat Sarah, hair styled into polished waves, a soft pink blouse, a demeanor carefully curated for sympathy. Brandon was beside her, his posture rigid like someone trying to appear composed on national television. It wasn't a big trial, just a preliminary hearing, but to me it might as well have been the final act. The bailiff called the room to order and we all stood as the judge entered. Older, stern, the kind of man who didn't tolerate theatrics or vagueness. Good. When the opening statements wrapped, Grace stood and began calmly. Your Honor, we will be demonstrating a deliberate misrepresentation of financial support, mischaracterization of ownership, and retaliatory defamation based on manipulated digital content. We'll also present evidence of financial fraud. Sarah didn't flinch at the word fraud, but I saw her grip Brandon's hand under the table. Grace called the forensic accountant first. Nolan stepped up, clear and clinical as he walked the court through the paper trail. Mortgage records, bank transfers, the intermediary account, the creation of the trust under Sarah's name. Every number, every name, every dollar, it was all there. The judge didn't interrupt, but I noticed his brow crease as Nolan revealed the exact amount Sarah's trust had ballooned to $82,000, every cent traceable to me. Then came the texts, the fabricated screenshots Sarah had posted to Facebook. Grace laid them beside metadata logs. An expert witness showed timestamps proving the messages never existed and even demonstrated how they'd been doctored using a free app. I didn't need to look at Sarah to know she felt it, but I did anyway. And sure enough, her eyes darted to the door, like maybe she could still escape. Then Grace said, "We'd like to call Sarah Watson to the stand." My sister stood slowly, the silk of her blouse catching in the seat as she brushed past Brandon and made her way forward. The oath was spoken. She nodded, and for a moment she almost seemed steady. Grace began with neutral questions, family dynamics, timelines, who owned what. Sarah answered with that sweet, slow voice she used on social media videos. The victim tone. The I didn't know refrain, until Grace pivoted. When you received the house on Pine Ridge, did you know your sister had been paying the mortgage? Sarah hesitated. I knew she had helped, once, maybe twice, but I thought. Grace held up a document. Is this your signature on the thank you note you sent to your mother in 2021, thanking her for letting Elizabeth carry the financial load until the deed cleared? Sarah blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed. Mom said that was just between us. So you did know, Grace said simply. The judge looked over his glasses. Sarah's breath quickened. Grace didn't press, she let the silence do the work. Then softly she said, "And the trust, were you aware of it?" Another pause. Then Sarah said, too fast, "No, not at first." "At what point did you know?" "I don't remember." "Do you remember spending any of the money?" I thought it was from Mom and Dad. I didn't ask questions." Grace stepped back. "No further questions, Your Honor." But the judge wasn't done. He leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Mrs. Watson," he said, voice slow, deliberate. "Your sister presented documented proof that she paid for the property in question, that her name was left off the paperwork, that funds from those payments were moved into a trust solely benefiting you. You're telling this court you didn't know." Sarah's composure cracked. "I didn't want to know," she said, voice small. "I didn't ask, I let it happen." "Why?" And that was it, the question. The one that blew it all open. Sarah's lips trembled. She looked at me not with anger, not with defiance, but with something closer to a child caught holding stolen candy. "Because I didn't want to be the failure again," she whispered. "Elizabeth always had everything. She was the one with the career, the house, the plans. Mom and Dad, they just wanted someone else to win for once." "And you let them lie," the judge said. She nodded, slowly, tearfully. "I let them keep lying." The courtroom was silent. Even Brandon looked stunned. And I sat completely still, because this moment, this unraveling, was not revenge, it was recognition. Not just by Sarah, but by the law, by the world, by me. The truth wasn't pretty. It wasn't tied up in a bow, but it was finally, irrevocably out. The courtroom felt different after Sarah's confession. Still quiet, but not heavy. Just suspended. Like everyone was waiting to breathe until the gavel fell. I sat frozen, not from fear, but from the sheer unfamiliarity of being seen. Heard, believed. Grace placed a hand on my arm, steady, grounding. Across the room, Sarah wiped her face with a crumpled tissue. Brandon had shifted away from her ever so slightly. Not enough to make a scene, but enough that I noticed. The judge flipped through his notes, then looked up, gaze direct. "In reviewing the presented evidence," he began, voice even, "it is clear this was not a misunderstanding. This was a systemic concealment of financial transactions, carried out over multiple years, with the intent of benefiting one family member at the direct expense of another." I kept my eyes on him. "While no criminal charges are being filed at this stage, the court recognizes that Ms. Elizabeth Hartley suffered significant financial and emotional harm due to deception and misrepresentation by immediate family." He adjusted his glasses. "Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that restitution in the amount of $92,400 be paid to Ms. Hartley by Sarah Watson and Brandon Watson, jointly." My breath caught. Restitution. A legal word for "you were right." But he wasn't finished. "Furthermore, due to the abuse of financial trust and the proven pattern of dishonest intent, Sarah Watson shall be barred from any future claim to inheritance from the Hartley family estate, should one exist." A ripple moved through the courtroom. I didn't move, not yet. The judge looked at me just for a second and then down again. "This case is concluded." The gavel fell. It wasn't loud, just a soft thunk of wood against wood, but it echoed in me like a final heartbeat. Grace squeezed my arm. "You did it," she whispered. I nodded slowly. Still trying to process the shape of this moment, still absorbing the weight of having something returned to me, not just money, but narrative. My story had finally been restored to me. I stood as the court adjourned. I didn't look at Sarah, not out of cruelty, but because I didn't need to. Let her sit with the reality she helped build. Let her understand, finally, that lies don't stay small, that no amount of curated victimhood can erase a trail of numbers and names and broken trust. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon light felt sharper than it had that morning. I inhaled deeply. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. Grace walked beside me as we descended the steps. "Want a drink?" she offered. "Or something stronger?" I laughed, a real sound this time. "Maybe later, right now I just want to go home." She nodded. "You did good, Liz." I paused. "I did right." Back at my car, I sat for a moment, engine off. Just watching the people cross the street, the wind lift leaves into slow spirals. This was it. Not a celebration, not revenge, just justice, quiet, overdue, and utterly mine. And finally, I exhaled. It was early spring when they came back. I remember because the azaleas had just started blooming along the front path, stubborn little things, pink and proud, refusing to wait for warmer weather. I'd just finished setting out new cushions on the porch when I heard the sound of tires on gravel. A car door slammed. Then another. I turned. And there they were. My mother gripping her purse like a lifeline. My father thinner than I remembered, the lines in his face deeper, like time had finally started telling the truth. They didn't look angry. They looked small. She took a hesitant step forward. "Elizabeth, please." I didn't move, just shifted my weight slightly, arms folded, and tilted my head toward the figure beside me. The woman in the blazer, Marissa, the social worker I'd hired. She stepped forward gently. "Mr. and Mrs. Hartley, I'll be here to mediate this visit. You may speak to your daughter, but you are not permitted to enter the home or remain longer than the agreed time." My mother blinked. "What but were her parents?" "She's chosen supervised contact only," Marissa replied calmly. "That is her right." Their faces fell in unison. I looked at them, these people who raised me, shaped me, used me, and I felt nothing sharp, no boiling rage, no fresh hurt, just a quiet understanding of what had been lost. My father cleared his throat. We didn't come to fight." My mother's voice broke. "We've lost everything, Elizabeth. The house is gone. Brandon and Sarah barely speak to us. We didn't think it would go this far." I met her eyes. "You handed them my life and called it a gift." Tears welled instantly. "We were trying to make things fair. You always had so much." "I earned what I had," I cut in, not raising my voice. "And you punished me for it." My father took a shaky breath. "Can't we start over?" I thought of the years. The quiet sacrifices. The dinners where I paid and they smiled like they were doing me a favor. The holidays where I played hostess while they whispered about how rigid I was. I shook my head. "No, we don't start over, but we can start different." They looked up. "You may visit," I said slowly, "but only under supervision. No more surprise visits. No more calls past business hours. And if you ever set foot in this house without permission again, I won't be the one answering the door." Their faces crumpled. "But we love you," my mother whispered. I studied her. "You love the version of me that never said no." She reached forward, maybe instinctively, but Marissa gently stepped between us. I nodded at her. "That's enough for today." My parents stood there a moment longer, blinking in the sunlight, stunned by the boundary they couldn't bend. Eventually, they turned and walked away. As their car pulled back onto the road, I exhaled. It wasn't triumph. Not really. It was grief. The slow, steady kind. The kind that doesn't burn, it just settles into your ribs and changes the shape of how you breathe. But it was also peace. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval or fearing their disapproval. I had built something stronger, and no one was taking it again. The folding chairs were mismatched. Some metal, some plastic. A few wobbled if you leaned too far back. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered just enough to be annoying, and the coffee was lukewarm at best. But none of that mattered, because the room was full. About 30 women, all ages, seated shoulder to shoulder in the little rec room of the community center 2 blocks from my beach house. Some wore scrubs, some wore cardigans. One woman had a baby strapped to her chest. All of them had come for one reason, to learn how not to be taken advantage of. And somehow I was the one standing at the front of the room. I hadn't planned to speak. I was just supposed to help organize. Grace had been the one leading these workshops for years, offering free legal literacy and finance classes for women getting out of bad marriages or tangled family debt. But today she had nudged me forward. "Tell them a little," she whispered. "Doesn't have to be everything, just something true." So I cleared my throat, tucked my hands in my pockets, and began. "My name is Elizabeth Hartley," I said, "and I spent 5 years paying for a house that wasn't mine, not on paper anyway." A few women sat up straighter. "My name was never on the deed. My name was never even mentioned when it was handed to someone else as a gift." I let that hang. For a long time, I thought keeping the peace meant keeping quiet, that as long as I didn't stir the pot, things would balance out. But here's the thing, people who rely on your silence, they're counting on your shame. One of the women nodded slowly, her jaw tight. "I let people use my money, my time, my name, because I believed if I didn't, they'd stop loving me. What I didn't realize," I continued, voice steady now, "was that their love came with fine print." The room was silent. And when I finally asked questions, they made me the villain because that's easier than admitting they'd taken too much. A hand went up, the woman with the baby. So what changed? I smiled. I started asking for receipts. A ripple of laughter broke the heaviness. I let it settle before adding. I stopped confusing sacrifice with loyalty, and I learned that love that demands silence isn't love, it's leverage. Grace stepped forward beside me. That's why we're here, she said warmly. To help you understand the difference between help and harm, between support and control. The rest of the hour passed in a blur. Questions about joint accounts, credit scores, how to check if someone opened a card in your name. I watched these women, quietly strong, quietly scared, begin to reclaim their narratives. And when it was over, as they shuffled out into the evening light, a few stayed behind. One woman, maybe in her 50s, touched my arm. My daughter's going through something like that. I'm going to bring her next time. I nodded. Good, she's not alone. Another simply said, thank you. When the last person left, I helped stack the chairs, my body tired but my mind lighter. This wasn't the ending I thought I wanted. But maybe it was better, because I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was teaching others how not to drown in the same silence I did. The sun hit the deck just right that morning. Not too harsh, not too warm, just a soft, honeyed glow stretching across the wooden boards, wrapping itself around my coffee mug and the little paperback tucked beside it. My rescue dog, Fen, was curled at my feet, snoring softly, one ear twitching at the sound of distant gulls. The ocean a few yards out murmured against the shore like it was still half asleep. It was one of those rare mornings where nothing needed fixing. Nothing felt undone. Where the silence wasn't waiting to break, it was simply peace. I picked up the book again, letting my fingers trace the title. The House She Paid For. My name, my real name, sat below it on the cover in neat serif font. Elizabeth Hartley. It had gone to print 2 weeks ago. A memoir, they called it. But really, it was something else. A reckoning, a reclamation, not revenge, just reality told in my own voice on my own terms. The call from the publisher had come the day before. The print run was doing better than expected. Bookstores wanted more. Someone mentioned a podcast. I didn't need any of that. Just holding it in my hands felt like enough. Across the deck, a soft breeze lifted the edge of my old throw blanket. I pulled it tighter over my lap and took a sip of coffee. Bittersweet, with just a hint of cinnamon. I thought of everything that had happened. Sarah, the courtroom, my parents' tearful visit. It wasn't a highlight reel. It wasn't even a victory lap. It was a slow, painful rebuild of something they'd tried to convince me I didn't deserve. Autonomy, recognition, space, a home. Because that's the part no one talks about, how easy it is to let people chip away at your boundaries when they wrap the hammer in the word family. I looked out at the ocean, the horizon steady and unreachable. Some things don't need to be forgiven to be finished. And some homes you really do have to build yourself, from the studs of grief, from the beams of disappointment, from the nails of every no you finally learn to say out loud. Behind me, Fen stirred and stretched, his paws tapping softly across the deck as he settled beside my chair. I reached down and scratched behind his ears. You know, I murmured, we earned this. He blinked slowly, unconvinced but content. I set the book down beside my mug and picked up a pen. Another idea had been forming, something new. Not about loss this time, about starting fresh. Quiet joys, the power of saying never again and meaning it. Maybe I'd write that next. Maybe I'd just sit here watching the tide come in. Either way, I was exactly where I belonged. Home, finally.